The golden spotlight illuminated a figure that nobody in the audience expected to see. A man in a crisp black uniform stood center stage at one of the city's most prestigious charity galas, his weathered hands poised above the keys of a concert grand piano. The audience of millionaires, socialites, and philanthropists sat in stunned silence, many with tears streaming down their faces. This was Kazimir Volkov's moment of triumph, but 12 hours earlier, not a single person in that room knew his name. They saw him, of course. He was impossible to miss, standing at 6'2" with silver-streaked hair and shoulders that spoke of years of hard labor. But they didn't really see him. To them, he was just another piece of the evening's carefully orchestrated backdrop. Invisible, unremarkable, they had no idea that the quiet man checking their invitations and watching their purses held within his calloused hands the power to move them to tears, to open their hearts, and to change their lives forever. This is the story of how one man's hidden gift transformed not just an evening, but an entire room full of people who had forgotten that greatness often comes disguised in work clothes and humble circumstances. It's about the heroes we walk past every day, the talents we overlook, and the magic that happens when someone finally gets the chance to show the world who they really are. Kazimir Volkov arrived at the Meridian Arts Center every morning at 5:30 a.m. a full 3 hours before his official shift began. At 45, he had been the center's head of security for 8 years, and in all that time he had never once been late, never called in sick, and never complained about the long hours or modest pay. What his colleagues didn't know was that Kazimir used those early morning hours for something deeply personal. He would slip into the main auditorium, where the center's crown jewel, a pristine Steinway concert grand, sat waiting for the evening's performers. With practiced silence, he would lift the fall board and let his fingers dance across the keys, playing pieces that transported him back to a different life, a different world. 15 years ago, Kazimir had been known throughout Eastern Europe as a rising star in the classical music world. Concert halls, from Prague to Budapest, had echoed with his passionate interpretations of Chopin, Rachmaninoff, and Liszt. Music critics had called him a poet of the piano, and a master of emotional storytelling through sound. His future had seemed boundless, his talent undeniable, but life has a way of rewriting even the most beautiful stories. When his 8-year-old daughter Anya was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, Kazimir made a choice that would define the rest of his life. He abandoned his concert career, sold everything he owned, and moved his family to America, where the best pediatric oncologists offered a glimmer of hope that Eastern European hospitals couldn't provide. The treatment was expensive, brutally so. Kazimir took whatever work he could find: construction, dishwashing, security, anything that would pay the medical bills and keep his family afloat. His piano-trained fingers grew calloused from physical labor, his concert suits were replaced with work uniforms, and his name disappeared from concert programs and music magazines. For 3 years he fought alongside Anya, driving her to countless appointments, holding her hand through chemotherapy sessions, and playing quiet lullabies on a cheap keyboard by her hospital bed. When she passed away on a cold February morning, something in Kazimir's heart shattered that never quite healed. His wife, consumed by grief and unable to bear the weight of their shared loss, returned to their homeland within 6 months, leaving Kazimir alone in a country that had promised hope, but delivered heartbreak. Now, 8 years later, Kazimir lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment across town, sending half his paycheck to his aging mother back home and volunteering at the local children's hospital on weekends. He had built a quiet, purposeful life, but the music still lived in his soul, demanding expression in those stolen moments before the world woke up. The annual Children's Hospital Foundation Gala was the social event of the season, and the Meridian Arts Center had been transformed into a wonderland of crystal chandeliers, cascading flowers, and elegant decor. Tables draped in ivory silk surrounded the main floor, each one representing a donation tier that most people couldn't afford in a lifetime. Kazimir had arrived at 2 p.m. to oversee the security preparations. He watched with professional detachment as florists arranged towering centerpieces, caterers set up elaborate buffet stations, and sound technicians fine-tuned the audio system. The transformation was remarkable. Within hours, the familiar auditorium had become a temple to wealth and charity. By 6 p.m. the guests began arriving in a parade of luxury vehicles. Kazimir stood at his post near the main entrance, checking invitations and directing guests to the coat check. He had performed this role countless times, but tonight felt different. Tonight he was acutely aware of the invisible barrier that separated him from the people he served. "Good evening, sir," he said politely to a silver-haired man in a custom tuxedo who barely glanced in his direction while handing over his invitation. "Welcome to the Children's Hospital Foundation Gala." The man nodded absently, already looking past Kazimir toward the cocktail reception. This scene repeated itself dozens of times as the evening's guests arrived. Polite but distant interactions, where Kazimir remained functionally invisible. Dr. Thaddeus Morrison, the head of pediatric oncology at Children's Hospital, arrived precisely at 6:30 p.m. Unlike many of the other guests, he made eye contact with Kazimir and offered a genuine smile. "Thank you for your service tonight," he said, and Kazimir could tell he meant it. Dr. Morrison was known throughout the hospital for his humanity, his ability to connect with patients and families during their darkest moments. Evangeline Cross swept through the entrance at 7 p.m., her presence commanding attention even in a room full of notable figures. As a board member of the Children's Hospital Foundation and heir to a media empire, she was accustomed to being the center of attention. Her gown was a masterpiece of designer craftsmanship. Her jewelry could have funded a small research project, and her smile was practiced to perfection. She handed her invitation to Kazimir with the casual indifference of someone who had never had to think twice about whether she belonged in such spaces. As the evening progressed, Kazimir made his rounds through the venue, ensuring everything ran smoothly. From his vantage point, he observed the intricate social dance of the wealthy, the air kisses, the practiced small talk, the subtle competition over who had contributed more to the cause. The auction portion of the evening was particularly fascinating to watch. Paddle wars erupted over luxury vacation packages, private dining experiences, and exclusive art pieces. Kazimir found himself calculating the amounts being bid so casually, single items selling for more than he earned in a year. Yet he felt no bitterness, only a quiet amazement at the sheer scale of wealth on display, and genuine appreciation for the generosity being shown toward the hospital. The crisis began at 8:15 p.m., just as the guests were settling into their seats for the evening's entertainment. Kazimir was stationed near the stage entrance when he saw Dr. Morrison rush past, his face pale with concern. Moments later, event coordinator Patricia Walsh appeared, her professional composure cracking as she spoke rapidly into her headset. "We have a problem," she whispered urgently to the stage manager. "Marcus just called from the hospital. Food poisoning. He can't perform tonight." Kazimir's attention sharpened. Marcus Delacroix was the evening's featured pianist, scheduled to perform a moving tribute to the children the hospital had lost over the past year. The performance was meant to be the emotional centerpiece of the evening, the moment that would open hearts and inspire the largest donations. "Can we get someone else?" the stage manager asked desperately. "At this hour, on a Saturday night? Everyone worth having is already booked or out of town," Patricia replied, her voice rising with panic. "The donors are expecting this tribute. Without it, we're going to lose the momentum we've built all evening." Kazimir watched as the crisis unfolded around him. Staff members scattered, making frantic phone calls to every musician they could think of. The clock was ticking. The performance was scheduled to begin in less than 30 minutes, and the audience was already growing restless. Dr. Morrison appeared at the edge of the stage area, his shoulders sagging with disappointment. "This tribute meant everything to the families," he said quietly to Patricia. "Some of them are here tonight, hoping to honor their children's memory. How do I tell them that we're canceling the one part of the evening that was specifically for their babies?" The words hit Kazimir like a physical blow. He thought of Anya, of those final days in the hospital, of the other families he had met during their 3-year battle. He thought of the parents who would be sitting in the audience tonight, dressed in their finest clothes but carrying the weight of unimaginable loss. His hands began to tremble slightly. For 8 years he had kept his past carefully locked away, building a life that was safe and predictable. Stepping forward would mean revealing everything: his former life, his lost daughter, the dreams he had buried along with his child. It would mean making himself vulnerable in a way he hadn't been since those terrible days in the hospital. But as he watched Dr. Morrison's distress and imagined the disappointed faces of grieving parents, Kazimir realized that some moments demand courage, regardless of the personal cost. Some moments require us to step out of the shadows and offer whatever gifts we have, no matter how long we've kept them hidden. The decision crystallized in his mind with startling clarity. He straightened his shoulders, checked his uniform one final time, and walked toward the small group of panicked organizers. "Excuse me," he said quietly, his accented English carrying a formality that came from years of careful speech. "I couldn't help but overhear. Perhaps I can be of assistance." Patricia looked up from her phone, her expression confused. "I'm sorry, but we're dealing with a bit of a crisis here. Could you—" "I play piano," Kazimir interrupted gently. "I would be honored to perform the tribute if you would allow me." The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia blinked at him as if he had spoken in a foreign language. The stage manager's mouth fell open. Dr. Morrison tilted his head, studying Kazimir with sudden interest. "You play piano?" Patricia repeated slowly. "I do," Kazimir confirmed. "I understand the importance of tonight's tribute. I would like to help, if I may." Dr. Morrison was the first to speak. "What kind of music do you play?" "Classical, primarily," Kazimir replied. "Chopin, Rachmaninoff, Liszt. I also compose original pieces." He paused, then added quietly, "I lost my daughter to leukemia 8 years ago. I wrote something for her that I believe would be appropriate for tonight's tribute." The words hung in the air like a revelation. Suddenly the polite professional security guard they thought they knew was revealed as something else entirely, a father who had walked the same devastating path as many of the parents in tonight's audience. An artist who had hidden his gifts behind a uniform and a time clock. Dr. Morrison's expression softened with understanding. "What's your daughter's name?" "Anya," Kazimir said simply. "She was 8 years old. She loved music almost as much as she loved helping other children feel better when they were scared or sad." Patricia looked at the stage manager, who shrugged helplessly. They were out of options and out of time. The audience was growing restless, and the evening's success hung in the balance. "All right," she said finally, "but we need to know, can you really do this? This isn't just any performance. These people have paid thousands of dollars to be here tonight. This tribute is for children who died. We can't afford to have it go wrong." Kazimir nodded solemnly. "I understand the responsibility. I will not disappoint them." As the organizers rushed to revise the evening's program, Kazimir stood alone for a moment, processing what he had just committed to do. In less than 20 minutes, he would walk onto that stage and reveal himself to a room full of strangers. He would play his heart out for children like Anya, for parents like himself, for the memory of dreams cut short and love that transcends death. His hands were steady now, his mind clear. For the first time in 8 years, Kazimir Volkov was going to let the world see who he really was. The lights in the auditorium dimmed as Patricia Walsh stepped to the microphone, her earlier panic replaced by professional composure. The audience settled into their seats, champagne glasses forgotten as they prepared for the evening's most meaningful moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "Tonight we gather to honor the memory of the children who fought bravely but lost their battles too soon. Their courage, their joy, and their light continue to inspire us in our mission to find cures and provide comfort to families facing unimaginable challenges." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the crowd. This evening's tribute was to be performed by Marcus Delacroix, but unfortunately he is taken ill. However, we are blessed to have someone else who has volunteered to honor these precious children, someone who understands deeply the journey that these families have traveled. Murmurs rippled through the audience as people wondered who could possibly step in at such short notice for such an important moment. Please welcome Mr. Kazimir Volkov, who will be performing an original composition written in memory of his daughter, Anya, who passed away from leukemia at the age of 8. The applause was polite but confused as Kazimir walked onto the stage. Many in the audience recognized him as the security guard who had checked their invitations, but they couldn't quite process the disconnect between the uniformed man from the lobby and the figure now approaching the concert grand piano. Kazimir had removed his security jacket, revealing a crisp white shirt and black tie that, while simple, carried themselves with quiet dignity. He moved with the measured grace of someone who belonged on stage, even as whispers of confusion and surprise echoed through the auditorium. He adjusted the piano bench with practiced efficiency, his movements economical and purposeful. When he finally sat down and placed his hands on the keys, something in his posture transformed. The security guard disappeared, replaced by the artist who had been hiding beneath the uniform for 8 long years. The first notes that emerged from the piano were soft, hesitant, like a child's first tentative steps, but as the melody developed it grew stronger, more confident, weaving a story that needed no words. The music spoke of innocence, of laughter, of bedtime stories and scraped knees and the fierce protective love of a parent. Evangeline Cross, seated in the front row, felt her carefully applied makeup begin to smudge as tears formed in her eyes. She had attended dozens of these galas, had heard countless performances, but nothing had ever affected her like this. The music wasn't just beautiful, it was profoundly, devastatingly honest. As the composition progressed, Kazimir's fingers found darker, more complex harmonies. The melody took on undertones of fear and uncertainty, of hospital corridors and sleepless nights, of hope gradually giving way to heartbreak. Yet even in the darkest passages, there remained a thread of love, so pure and strong that it lifted the entire piece above despair. Dr. Morrison, who had seen too many families walk the path that Kazimir described in music, found himself thinking of specific children he had treated over the years. He thought of their courage, their humor in the face of unimaginable circumstances, their ability to find joy even in the sterile environment of a hospital room. The music captured all of it, the full spectrum of the human experience compressed into a single, devastatingly beautiful performance. Throughout the auditorium, the audience sat in stunned silence. These were people accustomed to the finest performances money could buy, but they had never heard anything like this. The music wasn't just technically proficient, it was transcendent, carrying them beyond their comfortable lives into a realm of pure emotion and shared human experience. As the piece moved toward its conclusion, Kazimir's playing became more urgent, more passionate. His entire body swayed with the music, his face illuminated by an inner light that transformed his features. This was no longer the invisible security guard who had been part of the evening's backdrop. This was an artist at the height of his powers, pouring his soul into every note. The final passage was a masterpiece of complexity and simplicity, intertwined. The melody climbed higher and higher, as if reaching toward heaven itself, before settling into a gentle, peaceful resolution that spoke of acceptance, of love that transcends death, of the eternal nature of the bond between parent and child. When the last note faded into silence, the auditorium remained still for a long moment. Then, as if moved by a single impulse, the entire audience rose to their feet in thunderous applause. It wasn't the polite appreciation typically offered at such events. It was raw, emotional, transformative. Evangeline Cross was openly weeping now, her composure completely abandoned. Around her, she could see other audience members equally moved. Hardened business executives wiping their eyes, socialites clutching their partners' hands, philanthropists reaching for their checkbooks with renewed purpose. Kazimir stood slowly, his hands still trembling slightly from the intensity of the performance. He faced the audience with quiet dignity, accepting their applause not as adulation but as recognition of shared humanity. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the microphone, without any hint of nervousness or uncertainty. "Thank you," he said simply. "This piece is called Anya's Light. I wrote it during the darkest period of my life, when I was learning that love does not end with death. It transforms. It inspires. It continues to heal long after we think the story is over." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces before him. "Every child who has passed through the doors of our children's hospital has been someone's Anya. They have been loved completely, fought for fiercely, and remembered always. Tonight we honor not just their memory, but their ongoing presence in our lives and in our commitment to ensuring that other children have the chance to grow up, to dream, to discover their own gifts." The applause began again, but Kazimir raised his hand gently. "I want to thank Dr. Morrison and the entire staff at Children's Hospital for the compassion and skill they showed my daughter and our family. Most of all, I want to thank all of you for being here tonight, for opening your hearts and your wallets to support families who are walking the path that I once walked. Your generosity provides hope to parents who desperately need it, and healing to children who deserve every chance to discover their own light." The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 5 minutes. When it finally subsided, Kazimir bowed once more and walked off the stage, returning to his position as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But everything had changed. The invisible man had become visible, and in doing so, he had revealed truths that would resonate long after the evening ended. The impact of Kazimir's performance rippled through the auditorium like waves from a stone dropped in still water. As the evening continued, the atmosphere had fundamentally shifted. Conversations that had been polite and superficial now carried depth and authenticity. Donations that had been planned as tax-deductible gestures became deeply personal commitments to honor the memory of children they had never met, but now somehow knew. Dr. Morrison approached Kazimir during the brief intermission, his eyes still bright with unshed tears. "That was extraordinary," he said, grasping Kazimir's hand firmly. "I've been working with grieving families for 20 years, and I've never heard anyone capture the journey so perfectly. Music speaks what words cannot," Kazimir replied quietly. "Sometimes it is the only language that reaches the places where our deepest pain lives." Evangeline Cross appeared at Dr. Morrison's shoulder, her perfectly styled hair slightly disheveled, her makeup touched up but still showing traces of tears. "Mr. Volkov," she said, her voice carrying none of the casual authority she had displayed earlier in the evening, "I owe you an apology." Kazimir looked at her with surprise. "An apology? For what?" "For not seeing you," she said simply. "For 8 years you've been working here, and I've walked past you countless times without ever really looking. Tonight you've given us something extraordinary, and I realize how much we've all been missing." She paused, collecting her thoughts. "I'm on the board of the Arts Council as well as the Hospital Foundation. We've been looking for someone to head up our new community outreach program, someone who understands both the power of music and the importance of reaching people who might not otherwise have access to the arts. Would you be interested in discussing the position?" Kazimir blinked in surprise. I am honored by your offer, but I am simply a security guard who plays piano. I am not qualified for such a position." "You're wrong," Evangeline said firmly. "You're exactly what we need. Someone who understands that the most profound art comes from lived experience, not from academic credentials. Someone who can connect with people who have been overlooked or forgotten." Dr. Morrison nodded in agreement. "We could also use someone at the hospital who understands what families are going through. Music therapy is becoming increasingly important in pediatric care, and we need someone who can develop programs that truly serve our patients and their families. As the evening progressed, more people approached Kazimir with similar offers and opportunities. Word of his performance had spread throughout the crowd, and suddenly everyone wanted to know more about the man who had been hiding in plain sight for so many years. But perhaps the most meaningful interaction came from an unexpected source. Maria Santos, whose 7-year-old son had died from brain cancer the previous year, approached Kazimir near the end of the evening. She had been invited to the gala as one of the families the hospital had served, and she had spent most of the evening feeling out of place among the wealthy donors. "Your music," she said quietly, "it told Miguel's story. I don't know how you knew, but you played everything I felt, but couldn't say." Kazimir's eyes filled with tears. "I played Anya's story, and yours, and every parent's who has loved a child they couldn't save. The music belongs to all of us." Maria nodded, understanding perfectly. "Miguel loved music too. He used to make up songs about being a superhero who could fly. I haven't been able to listen to music since he died, but tonight I remembered that he would want me to hear his songs again." They stood together for a moment, two parents connected by loss, and by the recognition that their children's spirits lived on in the love they continued to carry. 3 months later, Kazimir stood in the same auditorium where his life had changed, but this time he was wearing a different uniform. As the new director of community music programs for the Meridian Arts Center, he had traded his security guard's jacket for a simple black blazer, though he insisted on keeping the same professional demeanor that had served him well for 8 years. His first official act had been to establish the Anya Volkov Memorial Music Program, offering free piano lessons to children from low-income families and music therapy sessions for pediatric patients at the hospital. The program had been fully funded within days of its announcement, with donations pouring in from people who had been at the gala and others who had heard about his story through social media and local news coverage. Evangeline Cross had been true to her word, working tirelessly to create a position that would utilize both Kazimir's musical talents and his deep understanding of human struggle. The Arts Council had approved the program unanimously, recognizing that true community outreach required someone who understood what it meant to be overlooked and undervalued. But perhaps the most significant change was the one that had occurred within Kazimir himself. For 8 years he had carried his grief and his talents in secret, building a life that was safe but limited. Now, for the first time since Anya's death, he was allowing himself to dream again. His first community concert was scheduled for the following month, with all proceeds going to the children's hospital. The program would feature his original compositions alongside classical pieces that had shaped his artistic development. He had already received inquiries from music lovers throughout the city, many of whom had never heard of him before the gala, but who now considered him one of their community's most important artists. As he prepared for the concert, Kazimir reflected on the incredible journey that had brought him to this point. A year ago he had been invisible, content to live his life in the shadows, hiding his gifts and his pain behind a professional facade. Now, he was a recognized leader in his community, but more importantly, he had found his purpose. The recognition felt good, certainly, but what mattered more was the knowledge that Anya's legacy lived on in every child who found their voice through music, every family who discovered healing through shared creativity, every person who learned to see past the surface to the extraordinary potential that exists in everyone. On the night of his first concert, as Kazimir walked onto the familiar stage, he felt the presence of everyone who had made his journey possible. His daughter Anya, whose love had sustained him through the darkest times, Dr. Morrison, who had recognized his potential, Evangeline Cross, who had seen beyond his uniform to the person underneath, and all the families who had allowed him to be part of their healing journeys. The concert began with Anya's Light, the piece that had started it all. As the familiar melody filled the auditorium, Kazimir could see the impact it continued to have. There were tears, yes, but they were tears of healing and hope rather than despair. The music had become a bridge between pain and possibility, between loss and love, between the person he had been and the person he had become. As he played, Kazimir could almost hear Anya's voice, encouraging him to keep going, to share his music with the world, to help other children discover their own gifts. The music filled the auditorium, carrying with it all the love, loss, and hope that had shaped his journey. The story of Kazimir Volkov reminds us that extraordinary gifts often come wrapped in ordinary circumstances. It challenges us to look beyond the surface, to see the potential in every person we encounter, and to remember that sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the simple act of giving someone the chance to be seen. In a world that often feels divided by differences, music and stories like Kazimir's remind us of the beautiful truth that connects us all. We each carry within us a light that, when shared, has the power to illuminate not just our own lives, but the lives of everyone around us. So the next time you pass by someone in a uniform, someone whose job it is to serve quietly in the background, someone whose story you think you already know, take a moment to really see them. You might be looking at the next person whose hidden gift could change your community, your world, or your life. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone in your own life who deserves to be seen and celebrated, hit that like button. Share in the comments about a time when someone surprised you with their hidden talents, or tell us about your own gifts that you've been keeping in the shadows. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that celebrate the extraordinary potential that exists in all of us. Because remember, the most amazing people are often hiding in plain sight, waiting for their moment to shine.